In this video, I would like to go over some basic navigation as you move through Google Drive. And to start us off, I want to go over a little bit of terminology, just so you know what I'm referring to when I'm saying what I'm saying. So this, of course, is a browser window. I'm using Chrome. There are ways in which all browsers are a little bit different, and there are also ways in which they're all the same. So this is pretty transferable from one browser to another. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Google Drive. And this is a familiar screen. If you watch the video on how to set up a Google account, you will see that there's some more stuff in it. And I wanted to add some example documents just so that I had a way of showing you some basic navigation. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about some basic terminology. So this whole window here is what I'm going to call the browser window. I have my web browser maximized. You might have other things going on your screen. You might, minimize your browser and have it, have other windows up. But when I'm working in Google Drive, I typically have it occupying the entire window. Your workflow is probably going to be different from mine, and that is better than fine. That's wonderful. All right. So up at the top of the screen here, you can see I've got a tab. And actually, just as we're talking about a little bit of navigation stuff, I'm going to open some other things. So let's open the weather. And let's go to, Google News. And how about Google Flights? And we'll talk about why that might be a thing in one of the examples coming up here. So I've got some tabs open. And right at the top, you can see that all of the tabs are in line with the minimize and restore and close buttons. I am using a Windows computer, and these are going to look different, of course, if you're using a Mac or if you're using a Linux machine, but I'm going to assume that you know what maximize, minimize, and close look like in your particular environment and on what side of the window you might find them. So up top here, in line with that, we've got our various tabs that we can navigate through. And then immediately below that, we've got our browser controls. So we've got our back button, we've got our forward button, we've got our refresh button. And then we have here, this is the address bar. I might also sometimes call it the browser bar. And over here, we've got some other controls that are specific to Google Chrome. I might do another video on using Chrome specifically and how to create a profile and log in and all that kind of stuff, but those are beyond the scope of this video. This is primarily about navigating in Google Drive. I'll go over why I've got the tabs open and why that's pertinent in a later part of the video. So just south of the address bar, we've got this little line, and I want you to think of that dividing line as the line that divides the browser controls from Google Drive. Now, the thing about Google Drive or Google Docs or Google Sheets or any of these pieces in this family of software known as G Suite is that it is software that operates entirely inside your browser. And that might seem a little bit strange, but the reality is that every website that you go to is an app. It's just most of them are pretty simple. So if you can make that leap of thinking of websites as software, which they are, if you can make that leap, getting your head around the rest of using Google Drive is going to be a lot simpler. So we are now in our browser window. So if I were to say click over to Google Flights, we've got all that same stuff up top because this is specific to the browser. And then just south of that line, we have the web page, which is an app. And actually, something like Google Flights, where you're typing information in and looking things up, it's pretty easy to think of that as an app. But even if I went to example.com, which is exactly what it sounds like, this is an app. It's an app. It's just very simple. It's an app that has one purpose. Its purpose is to show you this text formatted in this way. Okay? So let's go back to Google Drive. All right. So here we are in Google Drive, and up top you can see the Drive controls. So if I click here, it'll take us to our top level Google Drive. We'll get to what I mean when I say top level in just a moment. Here we've got our abilities to search within the Drive, help, the settings, accessing various apps, and our profile info. We've got some stuff on the right sidebar over here. These are very helpful tools like Google Calendar and Tasks and Keep. We'll cover those in a separate video. On the left side of the window here below the word Drive, we have the sidebar. I might also call this the left rail sometimes. There's a lot of different ways of referring to these things, and that can sometimes be confusing, but I might call this the sidebar. I might call it the left rail or just the rail. Right here in the upper left-hand part of the middle of the screen, we have the word My Drive, and that is where we are right now. We are at the My Drive level of Google Drive, the My Drive folder, the My Drive location. There's a couple of different ways of thinking about that. We'll get to that in just a moment. Right below that, we have the rail. This is another rail or bar of suggested documents. And the way this works is that Google will learn over time how you use your documents, what you access, when you're likely to access things. This is a pretty new account, so it's pretty much just showing me the most recent things that I have accessed. Below that, we have this section, which has our folders and our documents in it. Now, I'm going to make a quick change here. I'm going to switch this over to grid view. This is the default view. When you open up Google Drive, it will default to grid view. But you'll notice that this control here, when we are in grid view, it says list view because I can switch to list view. And when we're in list view, it says grid view because I can switch to grid view. Now, what grid view does is it separates your folders from your files. What list view does is it puts all those things together. Now, by default, these are going to be sorted by name in ascending order, so starting at the beginning of the alphabet and going to the end. We can flip this arrow by clicking it to sort by descending order. Note that it will always put the folders above the files or documents. But if we were to add a new document called Alpine Journey, I just needed it to start with A. When we come back here, we can see now that Alpine Journey has joined the list, and if we were to sort this in ascending order, it would show up first. If I created a new folder called A is for Alphabet, it would show up at the top of list of folders, and of course we can sort descending. And that's really helpful. I typically keep my Google Drive sorted in ascending order, so if I need to quickly find a file, if it's at the front half of the alphabet, I can scroll down and find it. If it's at the back half of the alphabet, I can switch the sorting order, scroll down, and find it very quickly. Before we get to the other options for sorting, I want to show you this middle column here that says owner. And because all of these documents were created by me, the owner is going to say me. Now, that might seem like kind of a silly thing to include, but the reality is that you, as you use your Google Drive, are probably going to have access to documents created by other people because it is a tool for collaboration. So the owner of a file that shows up on your Google Drive listing might be somebody else. The next column over keeps track of when a document or folder was last modified. So the default is last modified. This means the last time it was modified by anybody, any of the contributors who have access to it. You can also change this to last modified by me, last opened by me, and of course you can sort this in ascending or descending order. These are very helpful when you're trying to find documents because often I will have just opened or edited a document and I will close it, and as you might imagine, my Google Drive actually has lots and lots and lots of files in it, so it's not always straightforward to find things, but if I sort quickly by last opened by me or last modified by me, I can usually find the file pretty quickly. All right, so I want to move on to some basic navigation of Google Drive. If we are in list view, it's going to show us all of our folders and all of our documents that are on our top level of the drive. Now, I'm going to show you how to navigate things in list view, but just to demonstrate for you what I mean by top level, I want to direct your attention over to the rail, the left sidebar here. You can see this little arrow that points to the right next to My Drive. If I click that, it's going to point downward, and what's going to happen is it's going to list out all of the folders that are on that level. And you can see that if I keep doing that, it will continue to show the folders that are within a given folder. An older terminology for this would be directories. This is how we would have referred to things on a DOS computer, would be moving from directory to directory. But a directory and a folder are the same thing for our purposes here. So if we look at this, we can see that My Drive is on top, and as we drill down a layer, we see these folders, and if we move into one, we can drill down still farther. I can click the down arrows next to any of these folders to see if there are subfolders within them. So far, only CDW, which is the Committee on Document Margin Width Assignments, and Work have subfolders. Okay, I'm going to collapse those down. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So we've got a listing of all of our folders here. I can double click on a folder to open it, and we know that we just created the A is for Alphabet folder. There's nothing in it. Now here I would like to direct your attention back up to my drive. We now have A is for Alphabet next to it. This is what's known as a breadcrumbs navigation bar. If we created another folder within this one, and opened that up and created still another folder, and as we move into those folders, we can see that they populate in this breadcrumbs navigation menu up here. This is to help you keep track of where you are. So if you are in still another folder and you need to jump up one level, you can click on that there. If you need to jump up 2 levels now, back up to my drive, you can click there. All right? And we can see now that the folders have populated in the left rail here, but we're not going to look at that just yet. Okay, so if I double click on my work folder, we can see that we've got some quarterly report work in progress and a weekly schedule and some more folders that have, you know, other uses. There's nothing in them. They're just for example purposes. But you can see now that work has shown up in our breadcrumbs navigation menu. And they're called that just like in the fairy tale. It's so you can find your way home, right? So if we were to go back into still another folder, we might not know where we are in the grand scheme of our drive, but if we look at the breadcrumbs, we can always find our way home. All right, so in addition to our folders here in the middle of the window, we also have some documents. We have the Alpine Journey document that we just created. And in terms of moving these around, I actually covered this in another video, but I would like to show you here. If you click and drag this, you can go ahead and move this. So let's say I'm planning an Alpine Journey with my family. I can just move that into the family folder. Maybe I just got a job as a novelist and I can move this into the work folder. I'm going to undo that just for the sake of having a document here so that we can see it in the listing. Okay, so that's some very basic file management and navigation. That's going to be very similar to stuff you may have done on Windows or on Mac or on Linux before. The only difference is that this is taking place inside of a browser window and the hard drive that you're moving things around on isn't actually in your computer. All right, so let's take a look at this left side navigation. I'm going to collapse this down again. And we've got my drive here. Okay, think of it as a hard drive. Think of it as being like the hard drive in your computer. It just doesn't happen to be in your computer. It's in a server somewhere. So I'm going to click this arrow again so that we can see the folders in the top level of our Google Drive. And I'm going to click on the arrow next to work here. And we can see the folders that have shown up here. Now what you'll notice is if I then click on this folder, it will take me to that folder. We can look at the breadcrumbs up here and we can see that we've navigated from my drive directly to the Framistan maintenance reports or TPS reports in progress. And on the left here, we can see visually where we're at. We're a couple levels down from our top level drive. We've navigated through the work folder into the TPS reports folder, and we can see with this arrow and in our window here that there are no additional folders in here. Now, I don't want to tell you a workflow to use. The reality is that people are very different and different workflows work well for different people. I have suggestions about workflow and organization of your Google Drive, and you can feel free to contact me if you're interested in that information. But find a workflow that works for you, find a way of staying organized that works for you, and go with that. I use a bunch of folders in my Google Drive. Not everybody does, and that's okay. If you're able to find things, and actually one of the things that's really nice about Google Drive is if I don't know where my Alpine Journey document is, I can just search in the search bar. It'll find it for me and it will tell me the location is in my family. I can then click and go right there. All right. So the search bar is very useful when trying to locate documents. But again, if you have a way of staying organized that works for you, I would recommend going ahead and doing that. Okay. So let's take a look at CDW assignments here. This is the Committee on Document Margin Width Assignments. And our fictional committee member here, John Q. Presbyter, has a couple of folders. John has a works in progress folder, he has a deprecated folder, and he has a completed, ready to be moved to shared drive folder. So let's say I was tasked with working on an initial draft of the committee's mission statement. Vision statement. This would be a very long vision statement for a committee, but hey, whatever. Okay, so let's say I have completed that. I'm going to move it to this folder. All right. So in this folder, I have the committee vision statement. Let's say that I've completed my work on that. All right. If I click over here, I've got a similar arrow next to shared drives, and John Q. Presbyter, as a member of the Committee on Document Margin Width, does have access to that. And if I click here, I've got some more folders here. Let's say I wanted to go ahead and move this completed committee vision statement, or at least my completed draft of the committee vision statement, over to the Committee on Document Margin Width drive. A very easy way to do that would be to just click it and drag it right over to that drive, and I'm going to get a notification that the ownership of this document is going to change over to the owner of the drive, which in this case is the Presbytery of the Western Reserve, and that means I'm not going to be able to remove it anymore given my current permission levels. I knew that that was going to happen, so I'm going to go ahead and click Move. Now what you'll notice here is that I can then just click on Committee on Document Margin Width. It'll take me right to that drive, and we're at the top level of that drive. And here's the committee vision statement that I just moved over. If I click to shared drives, I can see the Committee on Document Margin Width drive, and it's the only one I have access to. So you'll see that navigating through the various drives you have access to using the sidebar is very similar. In fact, it's exactly the same, navigating through your own drive as opposed to navigating through shared drives. And a lot of it is very click and drag, very easy to use. Like I said, it's just a matter of getting used to doing these things inside of a browser window as opposed to doing them using a File Explorer app on your computer. Okay, I'm going to click back over to my drive, and this is sort of getting into actually using the G Suite apps, but it does have an implication for navigation. So I'm going to go ahead and show it to you here. If I click on New, and I click New Google Slides presentation, for example, it could be any of these, but I'm going to do Google Slides just to mix it up. You will notice that that opens in a new tab, okay? So that shows up on your line of tabs along with your weather and your news and your Google Flights and example domain. This is how the G Suite apps function. It automatically opens it in a new tab. So I'm going to add a title. And let's add a theme just for fun. Great. Okay, so now we have an awesome presentation, and the document has been named an awesome presentation. Okay, so this opened in a new tab. This tab is running effectively a piece of software, which is Google Slides, which is roughly equivalent to Keynote or PowerPoint or Impress, whatever you're used to using. This is the Google version of that. Okay, this is software that is running inside of your browser tab, just as every website you've ever been to is software that is running inside of a browser. This is just a little more complicated than a lot of the websites you go to. So let's go ahead and close that. We can see already that a presentation has popped up here, and if I click refresh, you will see that it is called an awesome presentation, right? So if I wanted to access that, I could double click on an awesome presentation and it would open it in a new tab. So just keep in mind that if you are using Google Docs or Google Slides or Google Sheets or Google Forms, any of these pieces of software in the G Suite of applications, the place that your documents is going to be stored by default is going to be your drive. Or if I were to open up my family folder and create a new spreadsheet, that would be created by default in the folder that I had already navigated to. So that's the default. If you navigate to a folder and then you create a new document from there, that's where it's going to go. Okay. So we were in our top level of our Google Drive and we created a slides presentation, which means that that showed up in the top level of our Google Drive. We were in the family folder and we created a spreadsheet, which means that showed up in the family folder. Okay. I'm going to close some of these other tabs. And I want to show you something else. The other way you can create a new document, so let's say a Google Doc, is by going to docs.google.com. That is the address for Google Docs. And we get a menu here, and it will show us the documents that we've created so far. But let's say I wanted to create a new project proposal. I could click on this template up here, or if I just wanted to go with a blank document, I could click on the plus. But let's do the project proposal. It'll give us a template and something a little more interesting to look at than just a rectangle with some text. Let's just change the project name to My Awesome Project. Okay, so I created this document from the Google Docs home screen. Where does it go? Well, if I navigate back over to my drive, you will see a new document called Project Proposal. And that's the same. If I go to sheets.google.com, which is the address for Google Sheets, and from there, I create a blank spreadsheet, call it My Awesome Spreadsheet. Joke's on me, all spreadsheets are awesome. If I click back over to my drive, we now see that the spreadsheet has populated. So if you go to slides.google.com, sheets.google.com, forms.google.com, docs, etc., any of those, and create a new document from there, that is by default going to end up in your top level of your Google Drive. And then you can move it around from there and do whatever sorts of organization you need to do. So the takeaways from that are, if you are creating a new document from Google Drive, it will show up wherever you have navigated to when you create it. Like so. If you're in the top level of your drive and you create a document from there, it will show up in the top level of your drive. If you are using one of the G Suite apps from that app page, so forms.google.com, for example, and you create a new t-shirt sign up or whatever, if that's how you create your document, then it will show up at the top level of your drive by default. And that's totally fine. Again, your workflow is totally up to you. My brain melts a little bit if I see too many documents that are disorganized like that, and I need to put things in folders to keep them organized. So the t-shirt sign up is obviously for the upcoming family reunion. We're going to put that there. Project proposal goes in the work, top level work folder, along with an awesome presentation. And we'll leave the rest in my Google Drive. So that's some basic navigation around your Google Drive and where your documents are going to end up depending on where and how you create them.